TikTok is, I think, worsening. I find that a lot of content on TikTok is really good. There are great TikTokers that I reference all the time for my channel, great content creators who provide really great insight and analysis. But TikTok is just not a place where you can have conversations about actual action. I think actually the entirety of the internet has a particular affliction where people will talk about doing things as if they're doing them, or as if they're organizing to do them, or as if they know a lot about what it takes to do them. And in actuality, even if you do, it's very hard to reflect that in casual conversation on social media apps. And the reality is that a lot of us probably need to be getting offline and talking to people and reading some books before we talk about certain types of political discourse. This is gonna get out of hand at some point. Today's discourse is about boycotting. One of many discourses happening on the app at any given time. Folks are talking about boycotting and whether or not it's a privilege. And it's one of those cases where I think everybody's a little bit wrong, because there are crucial details about political organizing that are being missed. And this is not coming from somebody who is the most experienced political organizer. I am not a political organizer. I am just a journalist. I'm just a writer. My studies of history have told me things about boycotting that I think a lot of people don't really factor in. So let's just start here, right? Somebody who is currently going by, I think, fuck bitches on TikTok. Sorry for using those words if they offend you. They previously had a different name and now they've changed their name on TikTok because they're trying to avoid a slew of backlash that they received for this take right here.
POV, I'm like the most annoying person you know. Oh, you just got back from Target? Oh, that's kind of crazy. Oh, you don't have a car and Target's the closest store with tampons in walking distance and you just needed tampons and the closest mom and pop shop is a 2-hour walk away and they don't even have tampons there? Yeah, but Target's unethical. That's kind of crazy. What's this? Oh, this is just my lithium mined vape from the kids in Congo. Yeah. What's this? Oh, this is just my iPhone from the evil corporation Apple that contributes to unethical labor every day. Oh, what's this? Oh, this is a Shein shirt, but I got it from a thrift store, so it's actually okay. You should kill me. Yeah, because you just shopped at Target. The point of this video is to point out hypocrisies people make every day when people are just trying to live, not excusing overconsumption and unethical labor and shopping at those places. Thank you.
I think that the disclaimer at the end was useful, and I do think that this person, I can kind of see what they were trying to say. But by and large, when you're making arguments that are essentially, oh, you're criticizing people in society for their choices, but you have an iPhone, like that's so cringe. That's such a bad thing to do. It just kind of makes the argument not work. I do think there is a lot to be said about the lack of organization of boycotts that are often referenced, talked about, and then used to disparage other people online as if to compare people's morality, when in fact the boycotts are not organized, right? They're not organized in a way that gets people on the same page and that allows for people to have, resources that can compensate, etc. And a lot of this discourse is actually being mediated in a way that reflects a misunderstanding of BDS in particular, boycott, divestment, and sanctions, which is obviously this group, this organization working to, combat Israeli apartheid, but also just boycotting in general and organizing in general. I'm going to show you an example of one of the many responses that this got, because there were many responses. And I will have critiques for it as well.
What I was trying to point out was hypocrisy within the field of boycotters.
I think you should stop making videos about stuff you don't know about. First of all, to take your own logic and apply it to your own video
is how we just point fingers at each other instead of trying to, figure out the root of the problem together, which is being mad at these evil corporations.
We should be getting mad at corporations, not getting mad at each other. Then why did you need to make an entire video pointing out the hypocrisy of boycotts that are working?
This is a fairly decent point that this creator makes, Jangita, because ultimately when you're centering a critique on calling other people the worst person you know and calling other people out for being hypocrites, you have to understand that that's polemical. You have to understand that that's spicy. And you can't then say like you're doing it in the name of not critiquing people and not having purity politics on the left. Because ultimately you're just doing the inverse, right? You're just saying you're a hypocrite. You're not standing up for this other cause. That's not the same as saying, hey, there are reasons why certain people might not be getting involved, etc. So I understand that point.
Boycotters, you know how we just use evil things all the time, but those are necessities, so we have to use those, right?
There is no field of boycotts. It's a targeted boycott. We're saying don't go to Target because Target rolled back DEI. Yes, there is consumption that is unethical. Most consumption is unethical, but we still have targeted boycotts.
Before they make this point, they're using a screenshot from BDS. And what you'll notice is that this screenshot from BDS has 3 different categories of targets, right? Boycott targets, pressure targets, and organic boycotts supported by the BDS movement.
We're saying don't go to Target because Target rolled back DEI. Yes, there is consumption that is unethical. Most consumption is unethical, but we still have targeted boycotts against Target, Starbucks, and Amazon. There is a main list, if you go on BDS, a main list of corporations to target. Because we know, as humans with brains, that it is hard to avoid such corporations. So yeah, target these corporations, girl. Target the corporations, speak about how evil they are, instead of being like, oh, people who boycott are so annoying. Boycotts don't do anything.
I also think that that's just a misrepresentation of the person's argument. I think that, again, like the initial argument was not well made, and in fact reflected a little bit of an argument that is used to dismiss the efficacy of boycotts. That's essentially what it turned into, right? It's the kind of argumentation that somebody makes to avoid, making their own strides towards accountability, to avoid questioning their own decision making, to avoid having to think about whether or not they should boycott. But at the same time, this person also, the initial creator, also made it a point to be like, this is not an anti-boycott video, it's just talking about hypocrisy and judgment, right? So to say like, oh, your video is saying, boycotts don't work, that doesn't make sense, right? Now, to prove also how messy and kind of frustrating this conversation is, let's talk about the corporations that this content creator is referring to. So this is the guide to BDS boycott and pressure corporate priority targeting. As you can see, there are pretty thick descriptions of what these terminologies mean. They describe the difference between a targeted boycott and a non-targeted boycott. The BDS movement uses the historically successful method of targeted boycotts, inspired by the South African anti-apartheid movement, the US civil rights movement, and the Indian and Irish anti-colonial struggles, among others worldwide. And they note that they focus their boycotts on a small number of companies/products for maximum impact. But here are the differences between those 3 terms that we just talked about, the categories. Consumer boycott priority targets. These are the companies that the BDS movement calls for a complete boycott of, carefully selected due to each company's proven record of complicity in Israeli apartheid. Then the organic boycott targets. The BDS movement did not initiate these grassroots boycott campaigns, but actively supports them due to these brands' egregious complicity in Israel's genocide and apartheid against Palestinians. And perhaps most notable, 3, pressure targets, not pressure boycott targets, pressure targets. The BDS movement actively calls for pressure campaigns against these targets. This includes boycotts when reasonable alternatives exist, being peaceful disruptions, social media pressure, strategic litigation, etc. Companies on the consumer boycott priority targets list include Intel, Dell, Siemens, HP, Microsoft, Carrefour, Reebok, Disney Plus, SodaStream, Remax. A lot of these are pretty, difficult to work around, but still are targeted boycotts where there are alternatives, right? Apple is not among them. So to the point of what this person was saying, saying, oh, but you have an iPhone. Yeah, well, I can't boycott every single smartphone company, but I can boycott certain ones that have particular direct connections with Israeli genocide and apartheid. For example, Microsoft is perhaps the most complicit tech company in Israel's illegal apartheid regime and ongoing genocide against 2.3 million Palestinians in Gaza. Its complicity in Israel's apartheid and genocide is well documented, exposing its strong ties to the Israeli military, its collaboration with Israeli government ministries, and its involvement in the Israeli prison system, which is notorious for systematic torture and abuse of Palestinians. Microsoft knowingly provides Israel with technology, including AI, that is deployed to facilitate grave human rights violations, war crimes, crimes against humanity, as well as genocide. So the BDS movement makes a clear statement about what it expects here. The BDS movement, in collaboration with allied Microsoft workers, No Azure for Apartheid, are calling for pressure on Microsoft wherever possible when reasonable alternatives exist, including boycotting Microsoft's Xbox and gaming, cutting institutional contracts from Microsoft, and divesting from the company. So this means if you are like me, somebody who bought a computer that uses Windows as an OS, and especially did so prior to this particular pressure target being announced, this is not you breaking a boycott, because there isn't a specific boycott on Microsoft. It is a pressure campaign, meaning to avoid Microsoft wherever possible. If I were to have bought an Xbox this year, that would be me breaking the boycott, and there would be reasonable consideration, for somebody to say, Elliot, you broke boycott, this is not good. Same thing with, cutting institutional contracts with Microsoft. So if I were, an employer and my workplace used Microsoft and I had control over that, I would shift it away from Microsoft to a different computer manufacturing, different tech companies. Similar things are said, especially about pressure targets, okay? And this is where I'm really kind of bemused, because this content creator mentions Amazon as one of the companies that you should be boycotting. But using even the image that they showed, it's clear that BDS is not calling for a boycott against Amazon. It is calling for a pressure campaign against Amazon, right? Google and Amazon, US. They talk about Project Nimbus. So Project Nimbus, the $1 billion contract between Google and Amazon signed in 2021, provides cloud computing infrastructure, artificial intelligence, and other technology services to the Israeli government and the Israeli military. Nimbus offers the platform for the Israeli military to run deadly AI programs such as Lavender and Gospel, crucial to the Gaza genocide. And see what the description is here. Use alternatives to Amazon when you can. Order products directly from companies instead of using Amazon. Boycott Amazon products such as Ring cameras, an Amazon subsidiary that partners with US police using similar Amazon facial recognition technology used to surveil Palestinians. So this is, what the old internet used to call a bit of a fail, right? And it speaks to the point that the original content creator was talking about, which is some of these companies that people on social media are saying boycott, 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 are not actually being called for a direct boycott against. They're called for pressure campaigns. Now, is this because BDS is simply too weak and sus and not a true, pure boycott campaign like the one that I would come up with if I was in charge? No, it's because BDS understands a little bit more about political economy and about how to organize people. And so, again, they choose, when it comes to boycotts, more specific, smaller targets, because those are companies that people can easily choose alternatives to, and that can be mobilized a lot more seamlessly. And they specifically say then put pressure on these other companies. So yeah, the original content creator is kind of making a point speaking to this, because they're saying, instead of judging people for shopping at specific companies when there aren't reasonable alternatives for them, understand that we're all, complicit in certain types of consumption that are unethical, and therefore we have to be mindful of that. Now, I still disagree with the content creator ultimately in how they made the point, because they didn't really say that. They spent the duration of the TikTok making fun of an idea of a person on the internet who definitely exists to a degree. I want to get back to the Amazon example in specific, because the Amazon example is really interesting. This is often asked, is it true that boycotting Amazon won't put a dent in anything because they have Amazon Web Services? And multiple Redditors speak to this. Amazon Web Services is where most of their profit comes from. This person says that they take 15% of every purchase that vendors sell on Amazon.com for listing and selling, which says, they argue that boycotting buying on Amazon has a larger impact than you think, but their percentage on every sale isn't the same as profit, replies another Redditor. And they point out that non-AWS Amazon, non-web services Amazon made $28 billion in profit off of $530 billion in sales for a profit margin of about 5%. Meanwhile, Amazon Web Services made $40 billion off of only $108 billion in sales for a hefty profit margin of about 37%. So you see that they're making not just more money off of Amazon Web Services, but they take way more profit off of Amazon Web Services, which means that not shopping on Amazon or shopping at Amazon is one of the smaller ways that a average person can affect Amazon's business. Moreover, when you call for a boycott of companies that are so integrated into every part of society and that often provide essential services for people, then you actually create a wedge between you and the people. You make it much harder for the action you're calling for to be carried out. You cause discord and you cause confusion, and you cause these kinds of infighting, right? These kinds of infights and arguments over certain people being worse than others, right? It is just not possible to organize a full-out boycott of Amazon among all people. You will see people that are like, let's boycott Amazon. And then some people will argue that you can't, right? I literally just don't buy anything from them ever, and I'm fine all the time. Why do people keep acting like this is so difficult? Don't log on to their website. The end, right? Just not thinking at all about how working class people have to afford certain things that are only affordable and accessible in a reasonable amount of time on Amazon. And even when it's not just as drastic as they can only do that, you're asking people to put significant weight in their pocketbooks to do something that ultimately has very little impact on Amazon. And a lot of people will get online and brag about this. You can see people get online and they talk about, whether or not it's effective. I feel good boycotting Amazon. Okay, cool. You feel good doing that. That doesn't give you a right to judge other people for consumption habits that aren't demarcated by an actual organized boycott. That's the big point, right? And that's the part that I think the original creator was trying to articulate, but they probably just didn't do it well. And I think this other content creator brings some really interesting points. This is the person that I put in the thumbnail. And I think, it might seem at first like they're making an argument that boycotting is a privilege, but in actuality, they're talking about it in a much more nuanced way.
See, the problem with hot takes on the internet is they often lack nuance, and two things can be true at once. Is boycotting a privilege? Yes. Do people sometimes use that as an excuse to get out of doing things that are mildly inconvenient for them? Also, yes. Is there such a thing as ethical consumption under capitalism? No. Does that give you the right to overconsume intentionally or to ignore all business practices? No. Do I personally try to boycott non-necessities from places that I know don't align with my values? Yes. Do I also understand that doesn't give me the right to vilify somebody who doesn't live the exact same way that I do? Yes. If you guys truly care about boycotting, you should care about bringing recognition and funding to mutual aid near you. Because the reason why boycotts were so successful in the past is because we had mutual aid networks that were designed to protect the average consumer who needed help in order to do this boycott. We're asking people to do the same thing that people did years and years ago, except the difference is they no longer have that help. They no longer have those resources.
The mutual aid point is crucial, and somebody else in the comment sections adds to that by saying, during the Montgomery bus boycotts, they started carpooling so people could still work. There's no sense of community with boycotting anymore. Everyone just yells at each other and never moves anything forward. I think regardless of what you think about like a sense of community or people yelling at each other, it is true that if you look at the bus boycott in Montgomery, they did create an efficient carpool system to replace the buses. At one time, 325 private cars gave free rides. City churches provided 22 station wagons that operated hourly with drivers furnished by the churches. They organized with churches, guys, black churches. 43 dispatch stations, 42 pickup stations, and scheduled service from 5:30 a.m. to 12:30 a.m. About 30,000 people were transported daily to and from work. Rosa Parks wrote the contact information for some of the drivers in this notebook. This is from the Library of Congress. And frankly, this kind of solidarity is not only not really talked about or understood on places like TikTok or Reddit, it's also something that, if it happened in today's day and age, somebody would invariably come along and say, okay, yeah, but you're using gas guzzling vehicles to do this carpooling. So you're actually just doing more harm anyway. That kind of argument is the kind of argument that the original content creator's video lends itself to because of how poorly worded and poorly thought out it was. You're lending credence to the argument that none of it is worth it, when in fact, a lot of these things are worth it, even if they're not organized, just in the sense that they can create social solidarity. They can create, a sense of people getting together and trying to do something better with their choices, let alone the situations in which there are organized boycotts. So this is the big difference. And I do think that the wording that boycotting is a privilege is kind of off as well. I do mostly agree with this content creator, the life of OFC, or the life of C, sorry, I can't read. But I don't agree with the wording that boycotting is a privilege, because boycotting is not an abstract thing. These folks who did the Montgomery bus boycott, not exactly the kind of people you would consider privileged. Some of them may have been, but a lot of them were working class black people in a caste society that was especially heinous in its prejudice, its white supremacy, and its violence against black people. It's not that boycotting itself is a privilege. It's that boycotting in the way that the online world wants you to is based in privilege, because it's a privileged conversation about certain people being better than others. That's not the conversation that actually gets things done. That's not the conversation that actually helps people. As Kalua Zoldyck Hunter says, we need to focus and try to make systems amongst the communities we are in so we can live somewhat independently. Especially also in conversations about Starbucks or McDonald's, which some people, referred to with regards to that original content creators video. Some people, were like, boycotting Starbucks and boycotting McDonald's is not that fucking hard. And again, when you don't take the time to think out your point and make that distinction clearly in your video, it leaves room for people to be like, so what the fuck are you saying? That it's just poor people out here who are desperate to eat Starbucks, desperate to eat their cold wraps and their overpriced super sugary coffee. I think another content creator that I wanna share here who brings a good perspective is It's Digi Chiaki. Why people don't boycott, in parentheses, boycotting is a privilege.
Let me tell you guys a little story. When I was diagnosed as a type 1 diabetic, I was told that I was no longer going to be able to have sugary drinks because sugary drinks raise your blood sugar way faster than anything else. And so as a result, I got kind of hooked on Pepsi Max. Like, I would have Pepsi Max all the time, even 2 times a day. It was not good. And then I found out about the BDS boycott for Palestine, and I found out that Pepsi Max was on the boycott list. Oh wait, little correction. I don't think it was on the BDS list, but I think both PepsiCo and Cola were sending donations to Israel quite frequently. And I would love to tell y'all that I stopped right there and then and never had Pepsi Max another day in my life after that. But I didn't. It took me quite a while to kind of wean myself off, and even then there was still be days where I'm like, oh, I'm tired. One drink isn't going to hurt anyone. But I did eventually reach a point where I stopped. And now I can't even remember the last time I had a bottle of the stuff. And I tell you guys this story because I understand more than any of these hyper-individualistic whataboutism scenarios, the biggest reason people don't tend to boycott is simply because they don't want to. And I think a lot of people are ashamed to admit that, but I'm here to tell you that's human. It's human to struggle with dropping something at a moment's convenience in a world where everything is at your fingertips. I don't think that makes someone evil. I don't think that makes them the scum of the earth. Where you guys start to lose me is that in being so insecure about the fact that you're not boycotting, you will come online unprompted and make videos that ultimately serve as a way to discredit boycotts as a whole. All because you want to feel better about something that you're choosing not to do. As much as she'll try to convince herself otherwise, Baby Bags' video was not an open, nuanced discussion about accessibility in activism, but rather it was her conjuring up a fake woke mob in order to validate her persecution complex, and to cultivate an audience that will reassure her that not only is boycotting a privilege, it is performative, and ultimately it is useless, because that is always where these conversations go. And I'm saying this with such a strong certainty because I've seen it happen before. She is not the first, she will not be the last. In fact, I vividly remember the same outrage happening over people asking to literally have their videos reposted and copy link. Y'all couldn't even do that. You guys expect me to believe you can boycott? I can't describe the amount of rage I feel when somebody makes a video trying to incite some type of activism and the first comment is, oh, well, I can't do this. Who cares? Genuinely, so serious, who cares? Find something else to do. Why does your inability to participate always have to be at the forefront? You don't have beans to make bean soup? Make tomato soup. Stop complaining about it in my comments. Because the only thing you achieve in doing that is discouraging other people. I saw someone in the comments of one of these boycotting is a privilege videos saying, well, in the past they were able to boycott because they weren't divided, but we're so divided nowadays. Why do you think? Because no one tries. The second y'all can't do anything, the second y'all get a little bit of resistance, y'all give up, and not only do you do that, you air it all over social media so others are encouraged to give up as well. In the truest sense of the word, you people really can't do anything. Also, another reason that I'm sure this conversation isn't good bait is that the way that it's labeled is such engagement bait. Attributing something that is a response to oppression as a privilege is in and of itself insanely privileged, because that means you are not in immediate danger enough to be taking these measures. No tea, no shade. Sometimes y'all's audacity really stuns me because I can truly imagine one of these white people going in a time machine to 1950s and telling the black people that they're privileged for being able to boycott the bus.
This is a great video. I basically agree with almost everything. Especially the point of like understanding people's desires and their choices. Especially the point of like understanding people's desires and their choices separate from a context and a framework that you're either making good decisions as a good person or you're making bad decisions as a bad person. There are things that we all do, I guarantee it, with the exception of like Greta Thunberg and a few other very noble people. We are all doing things that have unethical, realities. And not only that, but we could, with, a decent amount of effort, but not like so much effort, reasonably get rid of them. You can't disclose certain personal things that you do that aren't great, but you're struggling to change, because the internet is a place wherein everybody gets social credit by discrediting others. When you can create an enemy in people's head of a type of person that sucks, then you can use all of that to sort of prop yourself up as the more moral actor. And that's not what politics is supposed to be about. Politics is not a domain in which morality wins. It is a domain in which pragmatism wins. It is a domain in which organization wins. It is a domain in which numbers and resources win, where force wins. And therefore, all of these things we do in our lives are inextricably tied to oppressive things. And what happens when you don't make that distinction is that you end up in a position where you're like, fuck it, I'm tired. I'm tired of boycott this and don't eat that. I'm tired of don't take airplanes because of fossil fuels, and I'm tired of don't use an iPhone, and I'm tired of it. And then because you're so burnt out, you completely become reactionary. You go, fuck it, I'll have whatever I want. We saw this in the wake of the election. Somebody brought it up in the chat. Kamala doesn't win, and you have all these people that go online. You guys asked me to be too moral, and now I'm going to go back to Starbucks and shove it to you. You get this vindictiveness as if you're the enemy in these people's eyes, as if it's you against the world. And that vindictiveness doesn't serve anybody. That vindictiveness is not actually beneficial to anyone, because at the end of the day, we are all supposed to be in this together. Yes, we should be doing things, right? We should be making efforts according to our needs and our desires. And that means consistently challenging ourselves to get a little bit better at this, to do a little bit more with that, to donate a little bit more here, to organize a little bit more there. And at the same time, that also means you're going to fail a lot. And I think what happens on the internet, failure is so easily lambasted, but failure is like 90% of life. If you can't fail, then you can't do anything. If you're not willing to accept failure, you're not willing to do anything successful. So many people are stuck in these extremes between, well, I can't do it, so I won't do anything. And, well, I'm trying, so I have to try to do everything. Or anything that I do, other people should do. With no interest in, like, let me get behind the wheel. Let me get in a person's shoes, right? There are legitimate times where it's okay to make fun of people and insult them and criticize them for breaking boycotts, because the boycotts are not that hard to follow and oftentimes are organized. But ultimately, people take this shit so personal and they make this shit so individualized. It's all about the way that I feel. I feel so good because I don't use Amazon. I feel so good because I don't buy from this company. That's not what it was about. The Montgomery boycotts didn't work because people felt good. Sure, that ephemerality, that affective politics did matter, but what really mattered was that it was concentrated and organized, and it accomplished its goal, regardless of how people felt about it. I advise people to boycott as much as they can, but also to stop getting their insight and their way of thinking about politics from TikTok entirely. I am one of the most charitable people when it comes to social media discourse. I really am. I really think people are reactionary and anti-modernist about social media and discourse, and they confuse that with being progressive. They confuse that with being pro-liberation or anti-repression. No, you're just saying iPhone bad, right? You're just saying TikTok bad. The kids these days are dumb. That's all you're saying, right? People do that a lot. I believe that there's a lot of good stuff you can get out of TikTok. At the same time, at some point, you got to put the app down. And frankly, one of these days I'm going to make a video called Don't Trust Content Creators. Because I'm seeing people on TikTok lose their shit and fight each other over things that they don't need to be fighting about, make points that they don't need to be making, and participate in these political conversations and movements which are growing, but they participate in them through social media as if they're playing team sports, or they participate in it as if they are really just focused on their own self-interest, on feeling good about themselves, focused on making a come up for them and their friend. Maybe I'll get into, when I make that video, what the fuck happened with the H Mart Gate discourse, because I don't know who's following the aftermath of the H Mart Gate discourse, but I will just say that the creators that I shared, some of them, I'm sad that I shared them, because it has become clear to me that they are really more interested in building a platform for themselves and appearing a specific way than they are in actually doing the hard work of this job, And when I make that video, I'll also talk about how I am guilty as anybody of caring about how I'm viewed and caring about making money, because this is my job. And all I do to try to combat this reality, this contradiction, is be honest about it. I think somebody like FD Signifier does a great job of this. At the end of the day, we all have self-interests. At the end of the day, we are all flawed. At the end of the day, we all have limitations. When you don't accept that reality, and when you focus more so on the judgment part, then you ultimately are not a good actor, right? You're ultimately not, the actions that you do will be weighed down by the ego that you've injected into it. Shadowcat says, I've recently decided that I want to go vegan and I'm currently slowly transitioning into it. And all of a sudden, everyone around me knows how to be a vegan better than me. All of a sudden, you can just notice more and more people that are judgmental of you when you get into something, right? It's like this in every space you get into, in every affinity that you develop. You join a fandom and you get on that fandom's Twitter or on that social media for that fandom, and you notice that there's a bunch of people that are telling you that you're not a good fan all of a sudden. Why? Because you're more insecure towards that. And you have to recognize that insecurity and not allow it to be the fulcrum of your decision making. Okay, we are insecure people. Okay, we want to do good. We also want to be loved. We want to be respected. We want to be left alone. We want to achieve all these different things. It's just a part of it, right? I think also, just lending to this point, right? We talked about Amazon and we talked about, Target. These are pressure campaigns / boycotts. In the case of Target, it is a boycott essentially, that are organized to varying degrees, but they are, still, ones that are not 100% clean boycotts, let's say. Recently, I saw a discourse about boycotting Spotify. Let me tell you something. There is not an ethical streaming platform. I respect it if you want to leave Spotify behind. I avoid using Spotify as much as possible. I don't use my own account with Spotify. I'm being very honest with you guys in a way that, again, will open me up to criticism. Spotify is a horrible company, and yeah, that's like the whole space of streaming. And like, if you're one of those people that makes the effort to buy a bunch of cassettes and a bunch of vinyl records and go completely onto physical media, that in and of itself is not completely ethical. It is definitely way more ethical than just streaming on Spotify, right? But it's not an organized boycott. And when you think about it, how worth it is it to be yelling at people online to not commit to a boycott that isn't organized and that ultimately does not bring forth any helpful, solidaristic resources for people who are doing it? You're not linking people up with networks and with friends and communities that will help them commit to that boycott, right? I saw this tweet by Kev Never Oppressed on Twitter, which is really funny. I'm disgusted by how many of you still use Spotify. I use a fair trade, ethically conscientious mom and pop platform called Apple Music. And like, the replies are like a smart, grounded response, right? It's undeniable how uniquely evil and dog shit Spotify is. Someone said, but Apple being more ethical than Spotify is still impressive to me. You have to be a real prick to be worse than Apple. This is the reality. You can't get swept up into narratives of discounting boycotts or, shitting on ethical choices or more ethical choices in consumption. But it's great that people can at least start to try to have real conversations about it. Because when we're not on here debating and calling each other names and flexing about whose ideology and whose tendency is the truest and the purest and the most progressive and the most socialist and the most communist or whatever, we're in the background or we're in person or we're on the street having conversations, laughing about like how hard it is to make relatively better choices, how bad the alternatives often are, how complex this shit is. And so, yeah, I encourage people to focus on thinking about how to organize with other people to do political actions rather than focusing purely on talking about them on social media. In 2026, this is one of the things we have to reflect on and do. A lot of arrogance has consumed our spirit. We have focused too much, not discourse itself, but on the discursive element of politics. Discourse is good, doing discourse is good, shaming sometimes publicly is a good thing to do, but everything ain't one size fits all. And at the end of the day, all of us have to do what we can do according to what we've got at our hands, what we have available to us. So that's my rant about that.